let's get going. Final session of the day, no pressure, it's fine. Everyone's good turnout, everyone hasn't gone home, that's good. So I'm going to be talking about SOLR and search today in this exclusive session, it turns out. It's very strange. My name's Stephen Pope, I'm from the Sitecore development team. We're based in the UK, but also working with people in Denmark and people in the US, and working on new and lovely things that come into Sitecore. You can get me on Twitter at Stephen Pope. So let's get started anyway. The whole idea of today's session really is to give an introduction to SOLR. I wasn't sure kind of where people's heads would be in terms of having used search before. Maybe they were sort of a little bit interested in SOLR but didn't know enough about it, were scared to use it, how it actually worked, how it differed from Lucene, all of that kind of stuff. So that's the plan to cover today. Is we'll get a brief introduction, we'll look at it alongside Lucene, i.e. the thing that comes as default out of the box with Sitecore 7, and then we'll talk about sort of how Sitecore and SOLR work together and how we can get the best out of SOLR in our kind of solutions. Then we'll look at sort of enterprise SOLR, because of what SOLR is and how SOLR works, its ability to scale and extend outwards and offer a very powerful search solution is very important. So we'll look at the sort of SOLR cloud way of doing things, and then we'll do something. We'll take a kind of sneak peek. We all know 7.5 is coming. We all know that it's got some interesting stuff to do with MongoDB and analytics, but there is some further improvements to the search that we've made, and those will probably get swept away in all the press releases and all the excitement, so I'm going to point them out now so you can kind of keep an eye on them. So first of all, can I ask how many of you are using Sitecore 7? Show of hands. Good. How many of you know what Lucene is? How many of you know what SOLR is? And how many of you are using SOLR? So less. That's good. Well, hopefully we'll convince you that it's nothing to be afraid of, and it can help you out in certain scenarios and things like that. So for me, it's kind of understanding SOLR. When I explain it to people, they're like, well, how does it sit? What other things can I sort of compare it to? Really, I see it as the big brother of Lucene. So if you look at SOLR and you look at Elasticsearch, for example, they use Lucene, which is the indexing part of it, as a base, and then they build stuff around it. So they extend all the parts of Lucene and leave Lucene really as a project to get on with the idea of sort of indexing and storing of the data and making a sort of pluggable framework. And SOLR takes that up and to be a kind of standalone enterprise search server. So I tend to think of it like SQL Server. SQL is, you have your website, you have SQL Server, and then you would have your kind of search solution, and SOLR fits in that kind of tier. That you talk to it over HTTP by using XML or JSON if you want, and it talks back. So it doesn't matter what platform you're running on, be it Sitecore, be it anything else, it's all kind of open standards in the way that you're talking to it. The next thing is the fact that it's scalable, and we'll get into this when we start talking about the SOLR cloud stuff, but it's automatically scalable, index replication, auto failover, all recovery, all the things you want in that kind of highly resilient enterprise environment. But Java, everyone says, there's just, how can I use it if it's Java? And I kind of say to that, well, because of the separation, because it's running as this kind of separate sort of separate search server, you very rarely have to deal with the Java kind of aspect of it. It is there, and you do have to kind of understand it's there. But a lot of the time, it will run as happily on Windows as it will on Linux. You can run it on Azure, you can run it in AWS. There's pre-compiled sort of instances of all of that for you that you can just download and start running. Also, there's now the idea of SOLR as a service, which is companies like WebSolar will allow you to just connect to it, subscribe, and they take care of all the scaling and all the other sort of magic that needs to go on. And you leave it up to them. And kind of really not to be too afraid of it. I mean, so before I worked at Sitecore, I worked at a partner. We did a very large solar implementation, which powered the entire of a kind of government site. And 99.9% of the work was configuration. Mainly going into sort of XML files and changing cache settings and tweaking things in there. I think I wrote one tiny little bit of modular JavaScript to affect the scoring, which is now in this newer version of sort of, you know, in the newer versions of SOLR anyway. So really, you know, we're .NET developers. We're fairly good at trawling inside XML files to sort of change configuration and things like that. So because it sits separately, because, you know, you talk to it in these sort of open standards, it's very rare that you're kind of having to spin up anything to do with Java. It's just the platform it runs on. You can run it on Jetty, you can run it on Tomcat, which is obviously like the equivalent of IIS. Very tried and tested on Windows as well. I mean, it's up to you, but don't be afraid of it for those kind of reasons. So everyone always kind of goes, well, we've got SOLR, we've got Lucene, which one's better? Is anyone, you know, better than the other ones? And, you know, we all have people slapping Joffrey. But when we try and think of it, I just try and, like I say, so we've got this idea that it's going to be this sort of SQL server type thing, this separate thing in your environment that you're going to talk to. Now, when we were talking about Lucene, we're talking about local storage. When you run your index, when it saves all those things down, it's saving it to a local folder, some files on your file system. This can cause problems because you may have a distributed set of servers and you may have to copy those things across. I've had issues where the antivirus will be locking the file because you're trying to write to it or you're trying to do other things. Now, we worked hard in Sitecore 7 to try and reduce these sort of locking problems, and it's a lot less in the sort of newer versions of Lucene, but there is that distributed search problem. As your kind of solution grows, you tend to have more worries about how you keep everything kind of in sync. With SOLR, you have to understand that where we talk about a folder in Lucene, we're talking about a core in SOLR, which is effectively a collection, which is again very similar to the folder structure, but it's in that server. You can think of it like, you know, like a set of tables or whatever, but it contains the schema, all the data, and any kind of extra configuration and extensions or plugins that you may want within that thing. And you can have many of these collections, and these collections can then be distributed across many servers. And like I say, we'll see into that later. But when you hear people talk about a SOLR core, that is what they're talking about. They're talking about a single sort of collection. So what are the features? I mean, I could go through all of the ones, but the idea really is going back to this idea that you've taken Lucene and they've built on top of it to make it sort of enterprise ready. SOLR has been around for a fair while and is very battle tested. There are a lot of large sites using SOLR in production all the time. It's faceting, geospatial search, all of that stuff. Really, the ones that we see a lot of is the need for very good language analysis. If you've got multiple languages, they need to be tokenized and indexed in a different way, because every language has its own stop words and ways of sort of processing things. So we find that if there's a large language requirement, it comes with 32 really good full-on language analyzers sort of out of the box. It's, you know, very configurable. There is an admin interface, which I'll show you in a demo in a moment, and we'll look at some of those language analyzers as well. You can import documents into it, and then it's got various other features like highlighting, spelling, more like this, all of that stuff built in. Now with Lucene, there are some of those things available, but they tend to be community projects, and I've got nothing against community projects. They're absolutely fine. But when you're talking about kind of large scale under load, sometimes some of those things aren't necessarily as battle tested as you would sort of want them to be. You know, I mean, in Kern's demonstration, he used the spatial stuff, which was built on top of a contrib project, and it kind of works, but there's a few fuzzy bits around the edge. But with SOLR, it's been there for quite a while. So I'll do a demo now, and hopefully a little bit more successful. I may have to turn my computer around because I can't. I'm going to have to drag everything onto this screen, so I'm going to have to use this as like a giant second monitor. Don't turn your back to the audience, Steve. So if I bring this across here, this is just literally the file system, and it's very uninteresting, but this was a distribution of SOLR 4.8 that I downloaded the other day, and I've just taken the example here. But if you look inside SOLR, there's effectively a core, a collection that we've set up here called item buckets, and inside here we've got our configuration. The main one we're looking at here is our schema.xml, and then our data is where our index is kept and things like that. And we can have as many cores as we like in there because they're just represented by this folder structure in here. But obviously when SOLR is running, it's sort of takes care of all the locking and then the other things in there. So it's very simple. I've got a very sort of simple, oh no, if it opens up in the right window, drag across. We've got our start.bat, it just starts the Java. You'll see when we get into the cloud stuff that this kind of command to start it up is quite important. So if we're looking at the schema, we can sort of break it down into all of these things. So these are the fields that the schema generator in Sitecore, which we'll get into a moment, puts in. But you can see where we're here, we have a field, let's say name, and it has a type. And that type, if we scroll down, are listed here. Now these can be, these are effectively, these map to classes, Java classes. Again, not really anything you have to you particularly worry about. But what the great thing about SOLR is here is the flexibility and the ability to kind of chain these analyzers and tokenizers together to get the behavior out of it that you want. Now, when we're dealing with Lucene, you have to kind of do this stuff from programmatically from within Lucene.net. Here, we're talking about a shift of configuration from doing it inside Lucene or in code into the SOLR configuration, like I said, messing around with XML files. So you can see here we've got our standard tokenizer, we've got our stop word filter, and we can have a list of stop words, you know, if we you know, swear words or and the, you know, in the kind of English version of things. We're then going to push everything into lowercase, and then we're going to index it. When we query, if something is looking for this field, we will do a very similar set of things, but you can get it to do different things when it's indexing, analyzing, versus when it is sort of querying. So if we look down here to, say, the English one, so it uses an English possessive filter factory to remove, you know, sort of plurals and possessives and other things like that. If we scroll down even further, we'll see, we should start seeing other languages eventually. Yeah, so we can see here, this is a Bulgarian one, and then we've got CA, Catalan. I was going to say Canadian then for a minute, but but the whole idea is all this is flexible, and then you can go up and you can say that your field within SOLR uses this analyzer, and then when things are put into that field, it will index them, and when you query against that field, it will split and analyze the stuff in there. And this is where it all gets, you know, kind of a little bit confusing, but this is where the SOLR sort of admin system comes into play. So if I start this up, I'm running here in Jetty. So Jetty is very lightweight and just allows me to use it locally. If you were using it on a server, you'd probably choose something like Tomcat, although Jetty is just as good. I like it here because any action that I do, you'll see kind of pop up in that sort of console window. Once that's running, I can go over to my web browser and I can just go to localhost and jump into the admin system. And so this is a nice little dashboard. You can kind of see what's going on, how much memory you're using, if, you know, anything's exploding in your log files. And then you have a core admin. So the item buckets core that you saw me set up there is now visible here. I can do things like just run a query on it, and I can get some results back. So this is just me having indexed the master database within Sitecore. So the difference here again between Lucene and SOLR, we believed, or I believed, that SOLR is more powerful. So with Lucene in Sitecore, we store very minimally, whereas with Lucene, we kind of store everything because it can kind of handle it better. So that's our breakdown. You can see here I can output that in XML, CSV, because we all work with that format still, and then Python and PHP, and you can get it back in any sort of format that you see fit. So it's a case of we might not just be using it for Sitecore. We might be using this to power some JavaScript things or other things within the system, and then we can go up into the analysis. And what we can do is start saying, oh, sorry, I'll quickly go into the schema browser. This allows us to look at an individual field that we've indexed. So these are all the fields that have been generated over time and all the different types. So I could look at content, for example, and I can load things like term info to see which is the most popular sort of information, and get histograms about the usages of words and other things like that. And you can extract all that out through the API as well. You'll see, as I've been sort of doing, as I find my mouse again. Hello? No, we're going the right way? Yes, there it is. All of these things in here have been pushed through to SOLR as kind of just normal HTTP requests. So this has got, whereas with Lucene you would go into Luke and you would analyse the index. This has got Luke built into it so that you can do it through a nice sort of interface. You can still open the indexes with Luke. That's not a problem if that's your way to do it, but this is like a sort of quick way of doing it. And then very quickly I'll just get into the analysis. So I can sort of run a query here. I can run a tokenization, and then I can say, well, how would this look if I was in I was going to do this in text EN. So this is English. So I can analyse the values, and you can see as I go down the page, it's on the first attempt you can see there's a kind of little shorthand over here. So that is the stop filter. So and is one of our stop words, so it strips that out. And then as we go down, we can see that it's removed the plurals, it's removed the E on the end of horse for some reason. But you can see the process that the analyzer that we had in our schema has gone through, and we can see exactly how that is going to be stored inside of our index, and so we can understand that. So if you are doing things with other languages, you can type in a particular language. I was doing some work with sort of Chinese and Japanese, and we had to type stuff in, and then we had to make sure that we were analysing those kind of languages sort of correctly in there. So nice admin interface. You can get a lot of the stuff that you need to do in there, and then that's just a basic sort of whip around the park of SOLR. Let's fire that back up. Hopefully nothing set on fire. So, SOLR and Sitecore together at last. Well, so how do we kind of come about plugging SOLR into Sitecore? Well, one of the reasons is I joined the team and I'm a big flag waver for SOLR, but that was by the by. If we look at the sort of the history of the content search, so 2 days ago, it was actually our first birthday of Sitecore 7 being released. So yeah, on the 21st of May last year, we released Sitecore 7, and since then we're now on 7.2. We've been through 7.1 with the introduction of Speak, 7.2 with all the publishing improvements, but all that while we've been tweaking and changing and improving the kind of search experience throughout, and bringing the kind of Lucene and SOLR experiences as best they can. So when we kind of originally set out, there was Alex Sheba's sort of advanced database crawler, which was very heavily used. A lot of people, when they installed Sitecore, they installed advanced database crawler, and we wanted to take that, but we wanted to make it better. And then we had this idea of item buckets that Tim Ward had sort of demonstrated before, and this was the idea of storing a large number of items. But to get at that large number of items where you don't see a hierarchy, you need a search over it. And so we were like, well, we need to improve the Lucene search. The out-of-the-box Sitecore 1 was a bit old, so it needed updating. But then we were like, well, how about our enterprise customers? As Sitecore progresses and we get larger and larger customers, we need to understand that Lucene sometimes in certain scenarios isn't going to cut it, and people are going to need to swap it out. But we don't want to say, oh, well, we'll only do Lucene and we'll do SOLR. We want people to be able to plug in anything they want, and we have this idea of sort of search providers. So within Sitecore, we have a link framework for sort of querying. We also have an object mapper to map out things that are in our index into physical objects, and then we can sort of query them and work with them. But we wanted this to work with any search provider. So we're like, well, if somebody wants to come along and write fast search version, if somebody wants to come and write Elasticsearch or any new search, sort of platform that could be around the corner, we need it to be able to work with that. So when we read our link, you saw me looking at the types in the schema file earlier. So *_t would mean that it was text. Fairly simple. And so what that means now is that we can start mapping Sitecore and .NET types to SOLR fields by using these dynamics. So effectively I could say, well, if I'm storing something as a string or dealing with something that is a string, I'm going to assume that that is a SOLR text type, and I am going to add on to the end _t. Likewise, we've got this idea that if I'm reading in a field from Sitecore, I look at its type, its Sitecore field type, and say, right, if this is HTML or rich text or a single line text, I am also going to treat that. So it's a little bit sort of complicated, but if you really want to know, I mean, this is the kind of into the guts of how we kind of did it. So, but it's important to understand that the dynamic fields and how we work within the schema. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't use some of the great, like I was saying here, where you were chaining analyzers together and other things. You can absolutely define, my title or whatever field you want inside the SOLR schema, give it a very specialized field configuration, and just call it from Sitecore, and SOLR will use that, and it won't bother attaching any of those things on the end. If it comes across a field and it hasn't got any schema, title isn't in my schema at all, right? Next of all, it will look at, if it's indexing, it will look at the Sitecore field type, and if we're talking about in terms of objects, it will look at its .NET type and map things from there. So really, when you look at the field map in Lucene, it is very different conceptually to the field map in SOLR, and there's a good chance in the future we will kind of rename that, because they're called the same thing, but they're doing very different things. Within Lucene, you're effectively setting up your schema. You're saying how you want things to be stored and tokenized and everything like that. Whereas in SOLR, that's already done inside the schema in terms of your setup. So you are actually just mapping those SOLR fields to your Sitecore items at that point. So really, it's important to sort of understand that. SOLR Cloud. So this is the enterprise stuff that you really want to do. And SOLR used to be this kind of master-slave replication idea, and it was okay, but it wasn't absolutely fantastic. There were times where things would kind of, you'd need to take a machine out, so you'd need to make the other machine a master and tell the other slaves to do that. And it worked, but it was just a little bit painful, and there were a few more hoops to jump through. With SOLR Cloud, they've really addressed a lot of these kind of these issues. So now it's very highly available and fault tolerant. As nodes kind of come in and out of play, it understands them. It does automatic leader election, i.e. works out which one's going to run the cluster and go from there. You can also shard your collection. So we were talking about SOLR cores earlier. You can now say, well, I want my core, but I want it spread over these two machines, because I've got 1 million items, and I want 1 million items being queried is slow, but 500,000 and 500,000 on two separate machines is going to be quicker. And then you've got replicas, which we can use for redundancy if machines fail. And the whole thing that brings this together is a Zookeeper. So Zookeeper is another open source Java solution, but it's built into SOLR. You don't necessarily have to have a separate Zookeeper instance, although you can, and I'll get into that a bit later. But Zookeeper does the orchestration. So anytime you send a query to any of the servers, anytime you send an update, anytime you update the schema.xml, anything like that, it all passes through Zookeeper, and Zookeeper passes that out to the relevant ones. You don't have to configure that. It kind of sort of knows it. It's very similar to the whole Elasticsearch idea that you bring up one node and you bring another. It finds itself on the network and you just go, which is absolutely great. Zookeeper famously kind of started out as part of the Hadoop project for managing our favourite buzzword, big data. So if you've got that on your scorecards, you can mark that off now. Thanks, Kevin Obi, for that picture. So, looking at those kind of SOLR cloud scenarios, like I say, you can take your collection, your core, and split it over one shard. You've got one instance of Zookeeper, and you could effectively send a query to any one of those shards, and you will sort of get a result back. And I'll do a demo of that in a moment. We'll spin up SOLR in a cloud configuration, and we'll see how it sort of works with how the data is sort of split between them. Now, sharding really is when you submit a document to be indexed, and it basically passes through a sharding strategy. Some of the new features that we have within Lucene in 7.5 is a sharding strategy for Lucene as well, so that we can have a better strategy for Lucene as well. But really, the sharding strategy kind of just works out how many shards it's got and how it's going to sort of distribute it across. But then you can update the sharding strategy to do however you want to kind of load out those servers. But that's basically how it chooses the sort of shard. You can create redundancy. We're running in an enterprise environment. If things blow up, we want to make sure that things are running well and it's completely seamless. With SOLR Cloud running in a kind of sharded replica environment, it chooses a leader out of each shard, works on those. If there's any kind of problem with them, Zookeeper will go, right, I can't talk to that one, you are now the leader, and switches it over. And all the time keeping the replica and the leader in sync, and keeping the shards in sync as well. And like I say, you don't have to do any of that. You spin it up and it just works. Well, let's hope it does. But for whenever I've used it, it's worked absolutely fantastically. And then there's the kind of super ultra multiple instances of Zookeeper just in case it fails, multiple shards, replicas, distributed geo-locationally, some on the cloud, some on premises. You can do all of that as long as it can as long as the firewall's open and it can communicate. You've got one central config that it passes around between it, automatic failover, very, very sort of durable in terms of its thing. And like I say, you can send a query or an update to any one of those servers, and Zookeeper will sort out where it's kind of supposed to go. So you don't have to worry about that sort of side of it. So I'm going to try and do another demo again now. If I can shift this around. Apologies for the... It's my best feature. The back of me. So if I close that version, so that was just SOLR running in a sort of single instance environment. If I open up this bat file and show you what's going on in here, I'm saying to this one now, start me up SOLR, that's the word I was after, again. But this time, I'm going to have a collection and I'm going to call it item buckets. But I want to run in a Zookeeper environment and I want there to be 2 shards. And then just start me from there. So if I switch back, I start that one up. Oh, hang on, no, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go into SOLR, and I am just gonna kill the data, because I'll re-index from Sitecore. So I think there were kind of 11,000 or 111,000 items before. That should be still in my browser, actually. Where were we? Oh no, I can't see now. But the idea is we're going to spin up 2 shards, and we should see roughly half should be in one and half should be in the other. And we should be able to send a query to any of those servers and get the same result back, and it shouldn't affect us. So go into our example again. Oh, here we go. Start it up in sharded mode. Again, we get a flurry of kind of nonsense in here as it tries to sort of work out what it's doing. And then we go over to our example 2, which is literally a copy paste of this sort of environment. I'll just check that I've got rid of the data in there. Yeah, nothing in there. I don't have to worry about the configuration in terms of the schema file, because Zookeeper will do the upkeep of that. And if I look at the settings for this one says I'm going to start on the default for SOLR to start on is 8983. This is saying we'll start on 7574 because I needed to start on another port or their clash. So this could legitimately be another machine or something in the cloud or whatever else. But I'm going to say that the Zookeeper host here, the thing that orchestrates, is 9983, and that's how I'm going to get my information for the rest of my cluster. So if I start that up, hopefully the demo gods will be pleased. You'll see things like updating live nodes and other things like that. Because if we go back to our lovely admin system, once I find my mouse, hello, there we go. I'll go up to here. We should now see the little tab called Cloud has appeared, and we now get a diagram of what we're doing with SOLR in here. We can see that we've got an instance running on 8983, and then we've got our instance running on 7574. If we go to our item buckets core, we see that we've got no documents in there. So all I've done within my Sitecore solution, if I change to another tab, oh, of course, that's going to happen. Nope. Switch to there, go to control panel, go to indexing, go to indexing manager, and I'm just going to index something, hopefully. Oh, come on. No, let go. Thank you. Click rebuild. And off we go. And then we can bring up boring dialogues. Oh, you see SOLR doing its thing. Between the two servers, it's now indexing. And once it's finished indexing, it should do an optimize, and we should be done. Yeah. So close that. So if we now go back to our SOLR cloud, we can refresh and see that we've got, 6,027 over here. If we go back to our cloud one and just open up that one, we can go over and see that in our core we've got 5,868. But like I say, the sharding algorithm is not perfect, but all the documents are there, and we can check this simply by going to our query and just running a kind of star kind of thing, and there's our total amount. And I can send a query, I can send an update to any one of these nodes, and Zookeeper will sort out that thing. But in terms of the indexes themselves, they're now split in two. So any queries that are done on them will be much faster, and you've got twice the amount of caches and kind of other things like that. So that's just a little demonstration of SOLR kind of running in cloud mode. You just have to now imagine, I could run 4 instances here, one being the replica. I can close ones down, and there's examples on the web to kind of how to do that. And if you need any more information, I can give you info about that as afterwards. So very resilient. It will happily sort of work in that environment. Again, Zookeeper taking care of all the configuration and all the sort of query routing and other things like that. Hopefully not too disastrous. So, general tips. You're only really going to shard if you have to. Like I say, you need to assess how big your index is going to be, and how many documents are going to be in a single index, because you can have multiple cores that do different. So for example, you could have a news section in a particular core. You could have your media items indexed in another core, and that would separate it out on disk. It's only when you're getting to very, very kind of large numbers, or you need to do some kind of geolocation thing, that you may decide that you want to have not necessarily sharding but replicas in other places. But always consider before doing that, just because it adds a level of complexity. As soon as you've got 2 nodes, are you going to need the replicas as well for kind of safety? You probably are, and your sort of, the complexity of your system goes up. So look at the caches. I mean, I think with our very large production service of SOLR, a lot of the time we just put more memory in and increase the cache sizes. And I think still we were getting ridiculous amounts of hits, and our cache sizes were set to about 512 meg. It was incredibly performant. So see what you can do before considering sharding. In terms of Sitecore, one of the things to think about as well is in the Java client in SOLR J, which is how Java would talk to a SOLR instance, it has this thing called client switching that effectively talks to Zookeeper and says, which is your active node, I'm going to use that one. Sitecore doesn't, as of yet, provide client switching. So in my config file, I'm pointing to localhost 8983. If that went down, my cluster would still be running, but I'm pointing at the dead server. So always think about that. And the solution at the moment is software load balancing, very fairly simple to do, but you just need to be able to route that round. I'm in the process of writing a sort of context-aware and also a Zookeeper-aware client switching, but that's not there for now. But that's just one of those sort of tips. That if you are going to run it like that, you understand that you've got a single address to talk to SOLR with, so you might as well make sure that it fails over correctly if it needs to. So why would you select SOLR? Of course, if you've got a huge number of items, Lucene is very capable on its own, but there are times when the numbers just get too big. The operations, facets, geo search, etc., you would be pushing Lucene to its limits. Also, if you need a very reliable search tier, is this a key part of your business? Is this very, very important that the search is powering most of your site? If so, you're going to need that extra level of resilience. And then do you need to use that search tier elsewhere? As I said before, you can talk to this thing in XML and get JSON back. I mean, you'd never really want to talk directly to your back-end system. You'd go via something else, but you may need to repurpose that kind of stuff everywhere. And then the distribution, are you talking about global distribution of your search and other things like that, which you might be doing with Azure or AWS or whatever. And then finally, as I said right at the beginning, because it's got such good language analyzers, those requirements may be very high to you and worth considering for instead of Lucene. So really, if you were switching from Lucene, you kind of go, right, well, our first version of the site is good, but our search requirements are getting larger. The whole idea with us designing this thing is that the search providers should be interchangeable. There'll be some differences between the way things work, like I say, in terms of the schema, but you should be able to replace Lucene with SOLR and see no difference in terms of your code. In terms of those link queries, they would still be exactly the same because you would be addressing the same data. It would have just moved somewhere else. But be aware of the difference between the field map of what the field map in Lucene is doing versus what the field map in SOLR is doing. It also shifts some of your configuration. You're dealing with that XML file, that schema, things like that. Whereas with Lucene, most of it is in that field map. So that's another thing to kind of consider. SOLR uses a newer version. It is now completely tied with Lucene. So Lucene has released 4.8 in terms of its indexing engine. So SOLR has released 4.8, and the index versions are exactly the same. Lucene.net is still on version 3.03. So what that means is when you run a query with SOLR versus Lucene, you'll find that the analyzers are newer, the way it's working out scoring is newer, like a lot of versions afterwards. So you're still getting the same results, but what you may find is they're more relevant. They're working better, you get a better quality, but from a customer's point of view, they don't like it when you move their cheese. They'll go, why isn't this was at the top before and now it's not? And it's like, well, now this is more relevant, but they may not see it like that. So it's just worth sort of keeping an eye on. Common questions very quickly. Why aren't more SOLR features mapped? There's things like highlighting, spell checking, why aren't they there? What we try and do, we want this sort of 1-1 relationship with Lucene. we want you to be able to switch between them. And having features in SOLR that aren't there in Lucene wasn't really the road we want to go down. Now, in the future, we may have it so that you can extend certain to get at certain features of SOLR, but we want to do it in a controlled way so that you can switch between them. And a lot of people are like, well, you're missing out on this feature of SOLR or that feature of SOLR. You can actually get at that SOLR query object. As Kern showed in his demonstration, he was able to create a new index and pass different parameters in specifically for that search provider, and you can do the same. So it's not impossible, but there's a kind of discussion about whether we should do that or not, but that will be in future versions. What about Elasticsearch? Like I say, search providers, anyone can go and write their own. The great thing about Elasticsearch coming along is it's really made SOLR up its game. SOLR kind of sat there as its kind of big bloated, I own the search market, nothing really touches me. Elasticsearch came along and kicked it in the ass, and it's now innovating, and and it's also causing SOLR to really move and innovate along with its near real-time search functions and a lot of other stuff. So I think it's very good. Can I use my SOLR cluster for multiple sites and multiple instances? Yes, but you have to be very careful with managing where your cores are. When you define an index or a core, when that maps to a core within SOLR, you just need to split them up a bit more. It's definitely possible, but you just have to be careful with your naming and how you store things and other things like that. And like I say, if you're interested in that, feel free to kind of talk to me. So in the last couple of minutes, minus 2 minutes that I've got, we'll just look at some of the features of 7.5. The biggest one for me really is being able to run multiple providers. I wanted to do this right from the start, but we kind of didn't have time, and then it was too much of a large change, so it's taken a while to come, but it is coming. So now you can say, I want this part of my content tree to run in SOLR, and I want this part of my content tree to run in Lucene. At the moment, it's one or the other, but in the future, you'll be able to say, well, this is only a piddly little index of 10,000 items. I'm not going to bother putting this into SOLR. I'm going to have this running in Lucene, but this great big media library for the whole company, I'm going to stick into SOLR, and you'll be able to kind of divide those up. So I think that's quite good. Observable crawlers, for the work that we did with, I was going to call it Andes then, it's not called Andes, it's the experience database. The idea is that you have a flow of data. This flow of data is never ending, the analytics are coming in, you can't index that. With the content tree, I can go and start at the top and I can spider my way down and pull all that stuff into my index. With a flow of data, we can't do that, so our crawlers need to change. So instead of pulling the data down, they need to allow things to push information to them. So it's really the IEnumerable versus IObservable. And if you've not looked at IObservable, it's very good. It's literally the opposite of IEnumerable. It's very, very interesting. But it allows the crawlers to subscribe to data and then index that data, and that was very important. So like I say, it's very scenario specific, but it's a nice feature that we've now got observable crawlers in there. As part of that, we're gradually implementing features. SOLR's had join and group join for a while. We've now got that implemented in Lucene as well, so that we've got join, self-join, and grouping support. Fairly self-explanatory. It is not database join. It is not going to do all the things that database join does. You are dealing with search, so there are limitations to it. Read the documents on the SOLR site about join and its kind of limitations. It's an interesting read. And then just a little kind of bit of instead of typing search in the search bar now, you should be able to do what we call rule to iQueryable. So you can build up your search query with rules. We take that, translate that into an iQueryable. This might be better for your sort of content editors, business users who need to do a search query but are a bit confused by Lucene syntax and other things. So we've got that coming in the sort of next version. And then this, which I'm not going to talk about, so leave that there. I've run out of time, so I'm going to talk about that, but we are doing some work with abstractions. So that's pretty much it from me. We've talked about SOLR, we've seen what it's done in terms of Lucene, we've seen it work in a sort of cloud, clustered failover environment. a lot of info is coming out. We're always trying to put as much information as we can on our developer blog. On Hangouts, all our old sessions are on YouTube, so you can go and get them. We're going to start doing ones a bit more regularly and a bit more sort of as sort of a bit off topic, but going into other things in more details. There's our kind of Twitter handles if you need us or follow us, and we just tweet announcements and other things like that. I think that's it. There was a lot of information there. Hope you've absorbed it all, but if you have any questions, I'm available afterwards, or if there's any that you'd like to do now, please feel free if we've got time. Yeah. Oh, hang on. I think you ought to wait for the microphone.
How does SOLR handle personalized search or security in search queries?
Security is, we've got a solution for that now. It's very hard because when you do a query, when that query is returned, then you need to apply the security to it. But also if you've got a result set of 100,000 items, how do you apply the security to that whole thing? And one of the ways is to index the security in with the content, and then when you make your query, you query the permissions at the same time. And you can make it quite small. You can make it like sort of literally binary switches if you really wanted to really keep the size of that security index down, or the roles or anything else. So we do have kind of solutions for that and how you go do about it. Personalization, we are actually now indexing the experience database. So, the work we did with the observable crawlers and other things is kind of doing things like that. In terms of personalizing the experience as it comes out, again, that needs to be part of. You could have multiple versions of a field or something like that, but we tend to sort of split them up like that. Is that all right? Anyone else? Stunned silence. Cool. Well, thank you very much. And I just wanted to say a big, because I'm the last session, I just wanted to say a big thank you to all the guys who've worked really hard organising this. So if we can give them a big round of applause for all the work that they've done today. And like I say, if you have any other questions, just catch me afterwards.